Hey everybody, what's going on? I'm your pal Wes, and I am over the moon, overjoyed to introduce you to the Bastl Citadel. Citadel is a Eurorack version of the Castle 2 platform, so it can use all of the firmwares present on the Castle 2, like the Wavebard and the FX Wizard. They even give you a handy-dandy reversible panel so you can switch between the two. Citadel isn't just a Eurorack version of the Castle 2 though. It's got a couple of tweaks, namely some TRS MIDI input, a headphone output, and, a new form factor that you might find really appealing. USB MIDI is still present on the reverse side of the panel, and there are a couple of new little switches here to help us switch things up. But this device is really going after its namesake to be a towering module that can act as a sort of nexus for your modular and voltage experiments. Each and every little aspect and sub-module of the Castle series is broken out here, and it can all work independently or, however dependently you want it to. This makes the Citadel a perfect entry point into modular or a great addition to smaller systems because it can do so much. And it's also a really appealing, macro and sort of connected nexus little deal for bigger systems because it has so much in such a small package. Okay. All right. To almost the surprise of no one, this is totally awesome, and I love it. Whoa, but I'm getting carried away, and I'm gonna do that a lot. What does being a Eurorack version of the Castle 2 mean if you're not familiar? Well, Castle 2 is Bastl's portable, patchable, experimental little multi-unit here. And it is a platform that can host different firmware. So right here, we've got the Wavebard and the FX Wizard. And right here, we've got the Wavebard and the FX Wizard. The Wavebard is a stereo sample player with a unique length macro that controls both the envelope and the playback direction of the sample. There's also some unique modes with the sample mod as to how it responds to incoming CV and how those samples are played back. It features a really cool delay and chorus effect that you can route incoming audio through as well. And it features a pretty robust scale and quantizing system in addition to the other Castle 2 suite of utilities here. The FX Wizard is a multi-effect unit with a really unique and cool stereo spread feature that has some delays, replayers and repeaters, things that mess around with the time buffer, as well as some really cool pitch and frequency effects and some cool panning stuff as well. And you can step through them, like that. Both units feature robust clock, pattern generator, LFO, and audio input sections, as well as rhythm generators, a DJ style filter, and a ton of different options for, in the Wavebard's instance, you can control pitch in a couple of cool different ways, whether it responds instantaneously or whether it waits for a trigger. And the FX Wizard allows you to do a similar type of modulation control scheme with the time input, where it either immediately responds on the free input or it waits for the step input. And you can, of course, use both of those inputs together on both units to achieve, really cool stuff. Both the Wavebard and the FX Wizard can be updated via USB-C, and in the instance of the Wavebard, you have access to a web-based editor that allows you to change samples as well as scales and rhythms. You can add or subtract, and you can really get in there for some super deep and gritty control. Both units also have really well-considered MIDI control schemes. They didn't just kind of turn on MIDI control. The Wavebard has a really well thought out spread of features across the keyboard that we'll talk a little bit about, as well as all of these knobs, including the shift functionality, can be controlled with MIDI CCs. The FX Wizard responds to the mod wheel in really fun ways, as well as also having the MIDI keyboard broken up and doing a couple different functions because, of course, the FX are not looking for pitch. So we don't like to waste any time here. Let's dig right in, take a look at the panel, and see what we can learn. Our top Patchbay is divided into sections that are each outlined, going across the top there, left to right, with our clock, pattern generator, LFO, and audio input and output. The top row of jacks are all inputs, and the middle row is all outputs with the white outline around their function. The bottom row of jacks is going to have our brand new MIDI TRS input on the left and our headphone output on the right, which can drive up to 250 ohm headphones, which is pretty rockin' awesome. And then sandwiched in between those two new features, we've got our Castle specific inputs here. So those are going to be the inputs that correspond to our knobs and our Wavebarred or FX Wizard controls. And you can see these knobs are now big. They are metal potentiometers. They're absolutely solid. We can really wail on them all we want. And if we continue to take a look, we can see we've got our shift button, which outlines our shift functions, which are all of our silver functions here. And then our bank button, which lets us step through our banks on the Wavebarred and our effects on the FX Wizard. Above the buttons are our two new switches, which allow us to kind of change how the pattern generator interprets or what it does with the outgoing voltage. So that's pretty cool, but we will get into that in just a moment. Two things I just want to highlight before we go any further is our LFO and metronome window right in the middle here, this little metronome triangle guy there. So that shows our LFO speed, and if we hold shift, it lets us change the tempo here. Finally, we will point out the USB-C output, which is on the side of the panel here, and that is going to allow you to change the firmware and do MIDI input and output, because the TRS MIDI is only for input. So that's the gist of the panel. So let's dive into these sub-modules and how they work and how this new form factor affects some of our favorite familiar Castle functions. Before we go any further, I really just want to pause for a moment and plant this little idea seed in your mind as we walk through these little sub-modules here. Kind of just be aware that each and every one of them will work totally independently of the ones next to it. And you can create, patch programmable functions and behaviors that are really, really awesome. But if you wanted to use these functions, because they are all pretty unique and cool, as we'll see here in just a moment, just as different tools in your modular system, that is completely a great idea. And that's kind of how this was designed, is to really unify a lot of different things in a really cool, practical, performative, and fun way. So just keep that little seed in your brain and let's dive right in. All right, so let's start with the clock section over here on the left, and a ton of stuff is going to be linked to the clock here, the pattern generator and the rhythm generator, as well as the LFO in sync mode here. And you can set the clock by holding shift and moving this little tempo knob here with the shift functionality. You can also hold shift and tap in a tempo. Fast or slow, whatever you want to go. Now, this behavior changes if we take an external clock, like let's say from the Neo Trinity here, and we can actually see that the tempo window is indicating pink to us, which means that it's just internal clock here. But check out what happens when we patch that in. It turns blue here, which is part of the Castle and Citadel by extension, sort of visual language here of tempo sync, which kind of shows you that, cooler tempos are, external sync, and, sort of warmer tempos are internal sync to different degrees, ignoring things. When the Citadel is receiving external sync from an analog source or from a MIDI source, the shift and tempo function acts as a divider. So you can actually start to divide and multiply at the higher end there. And what's going to happen is if you patch in a analog sync signal and a MIDI sync signal at the same time, it's going to grab whichever one is it catches first, okay? And then, when there's a stop and it drops out, it's going to do that again. So just be aware of that. Moving along to the right here, we've got our pattern generator section. Now this is really cool here. And there's a couple of fun little updates here, right? So of course on the top row, we've got our reset, our CV in, and our gate in. And then right below it, of course, our CV and our gate outputs there. So our gate output is going to be our rhythm generator here. So if we hold shift and turn the rhythm knob, it's going to generate a rhythm pattern that we can define in the web editor. You can upload a ton of different tables of, different variations, roles, divisions, whatever you want. It's super cool. We'll touch on that more later. The CV generator can make a 16-step pattern, and depending on where these switches are, it can either be an inverted sort of 32 pseudo loop, or it can be a totally random, wild and wacky pattern. Okay, so let's take a look at how these switches work. So there's a switch for CV and there's a switch for gate, and they work the same way for both pattern generators. In the middle, or when there's voltage plugged in here, because the switches only work when these jacks are not active. So when there's nothing plugged into them, these switches will work here, right? So in the middle, for the gate pattern, you're just gonna get the gate table that you have assigned here. Just straight the way it is. If you go down to inverted, it's gonna turn that into an inverted 32-step sequence. And if you go up, it's gonna randomize the position in the table, the gate sequence. So it's going to give you kind of like a random pattern there, right? But with the same amount of, trig on and so on and so forth, right? The CV switch works pretty much the same way. When it's in the middle, there's a 16-step sequence that's pretty much locked in. Down turns it into an inverted pseudo 32-step, and up gives you just a random sequence here. So I think this might be easier to hear. So let's patch this up. Let's just grab the headphone output there, and we will just grab CV, our CV sequence here, and then let's just go into the sample modulation and change our sample modulation to that. Oh, our tempo is way too fast. So we can hear, let's bring this down a little bit. So we can hear that we've got a little loop here, right? Because it's in the middle. If we were to go down, we've got kind of like that inverted pseudo 32-step sequence here, right? And if we go up again, back to what we had before. Now we can inject a brand new sequence in there by going up to random. And then what you want to do, what I think is pretty cool, is to kind of hop back and forth and use momentary pushes. Let's speed this up a little bit. I want more of those high notes. Ooh, there I got 2, right? So now I'll go down. Give us a little 32-step sequence. And then, of course we need to start adding some effects because we're already here, we might as well. But what happens when there is voltage present on the input here? Well, something really cool actually. So it spreads out these switch values across the voltage range. So if it is below 1.6 volts, you will get the down switch behavior, which is this 32-step inverted sequence. If we go above 1.6 volts, you'll start to get just the middle switch behavior, 1.6 to 3.2. And then if you go above 3.2, you'll start to get totally random, just like the up position. Okay, so just to recap, with the switches, the handy dandy, thing to know is Up is going to be randomizing the pattern for the CV. It's going to be injecting new CV patterns in. Middle is going to hold on to what you've got. So in the case of the CV pattern, it's going to, hold on to the last 16-step random sequence. And in the gate pattern, it's going to give you just the unabridged rhythm pattern that you have active. And then down is going to give you that pseudo 32-step inverted sequence. So it's going to be, the same as middle, but inverted and a little bit shifted around there. It's going to be really advantageous and fun to kind of change up these modes as you're playing and exploring new patterns and beats, especially in performance settings and when you're using the Wavebard as kind of a CV source for different aspects of your gear or modular system. So let's move on to the LFO section. And like most things with the Citadel, it may look deceptively simple, but under the surface, it's got a lot of really cool functionality that we're going to explore. So the basics, the greatest hits are all here. We've got our reset input, our mod input, which ties to the LFO mod right here. We can modulate the LFO positive or negative. And then of course our square and triangle output right down there. We can define the speed with this LFO knob down here. And it is worth noting, like it says right up at the top there, that synced values, tempo synced values are going to be on the left side and sort of free values are going to be on the right. So unsynced, just free flowing LFO action. The LFO is of course an amazing source of modulation for the pattern generator, and of course all of these controls right below it that are going to be fun on a bun to modulate the heck out of. But what might not be obvious just by looking at the LFO is that there are actually secret waves if you employ patch programmability. So let's check that out. So I'm going to grab the output of the dark matter here and then come out of our handy dandy headphone output and, anything can be an oscillator really. So let's take this triangle output and go into our bass. It sounds like a triangle wave, right? That's really obvious there. So we've got this really obvious triangle wave, right? So let's grab the square wave now and go into the mod input. And then the LFO mod knob over here is actually going to allow us to get a little bit more of a ramp wave. And of course you can reverse this process and try other combinations of waves into the reset and mod input on the LFO to change the shape up, and experiment. So go have fun. And check out the manual if you want even more tips on how to achieve even cooler patch programmability. Alright, sorry, we got a little bit carried away there, but I hope you can see that the LFO has a lot more going on than meets the eye. The patch programmable, logarithmic, and exponential waves make for really, really fun kind of like kooky sort of off-kilter modulation sources. But it is worth noting that they are dependent on both the, speed, it's going to affect the speed if you go into mod, and the position of the LFO mod knob over here on the left. So, play around with those things. It's really, really fun. This whole module is kind of a patch programmable playground when you really think about it. So explore all sorts of different combinations of modulation and sequences and, just have fun. Find cool new riffs, rhythms, beats, and have a blast, all right? All right, so our last little section over here, the audio section, input, output, and of course our headphones here. So first thing to note is that the audio input, the left is normalized to the right. So if you're patching in Eurorack, of course, probably just go to the left in, and then you will get two signals on the output there because it'll be copied. If we go ahead and connect an input here, we can set the input gain with shift and the pitch mod knob here, and this will indicate to us, it'll turn yellow if we start hitting peaks, and it'll hit red if we start clipping, which we usually want to stay out of, but you know, if you want to get into that sort of like digital hard clippy area, you know, go for it, it's fun. If we want to set our output, we just hold shift and we grab the pitch knob here, and that'll let us set the output. And it's worth noticing that the output is set for both the output of the audio bay right here and the headphone jack simultaneously. Something else that's really cool about the audio section, and a perfect segue into the advanced section of the Citadel, is that you can change whether the input routing goes through the effects or is mixed at the output here. So check this out. Right now, we've got this little pattern here, and if I was to try to apply Citadel effects, nothing would happen, right? Because I've got it set that way. So let's dive into advanced mode here. So to enter advanced mode, we hold shift and bank there, the bottom two buttons, for a couple seconds, and then we'll notice that this all starts flashing at us here, right? So this is a very helpful little screen. So what we can do is first we can get to what we came here for, which is changing the input routing. So up here we can spin the pitch knob, and red I like to remember for rock on red effects, rock on, right? And then blue is just, you know, I'm blue because there's no effects, right? So we're gonna set it to red, and then we're gonna exit advanced mode by holding the buttons again, and then we'll double check to make sure we got what we wanted here, right? So there it is. We can hear that beautiful stereo chorusy flangery awesomeness. And we've got delay on the left side over here, right? Awesome. Love it. Turn this down for just a moment and go back into advanced mode here by holding the buttons again. And we can see that we actually have two other options here. So on the left side over here, we have the audio input behavior. Now on the Castle desktop units, this advanced setting lets us change between, you know, the left channel or the right channel, only to listen to those ones. But on the Citadel, we have access to the left and the right channel. So they did a little something different here. In the middle, it's just our standard stereo in, stereo out, right? On the right side, it'll turn red, and it will mix the left and the right inputs down to mono. So you get two mono copies at the left and right, and that's all it does. So that's pretty helpful, especially if you're patching in just a Eurorack realm. You can get some parallel processing. You could start to do all sorts of fun stuff with, you know, those two output signals there. If we go back to the middle, back through, you know, normal stereo, and then over to the left, we get blue. Now what this does is the same thing where it mixes the left and the right inputs down to mono, but then it gives a little bit, 6 decibels of attenuation. It dials it down 6 decibels, -6 decibels. So that's pretty cool too, you know, if you're really conscious of your output signal there. So, you know, just some options for you. I think it's pretty fun. Also, if you were driving these outputs like really hot, but you know, you're maybe doing something different with your headphone jack, that's another instance where, hey, maybe that might be helpful. And down here on our tempo indicator, we actually have a couple of options too. So if we spin the LFO knob to the left, we'll get this kind of khaki color. And what that means is that we are now ignoring MIDI clock. If we spin it past the blue in the middle, which is all clock signals accepted, it's listening for everything, and we go to this orange color, it's going to be using just the internal tempo generator and ignoring the analog sync input, right? So this is really helpful if you, let's say you're sending a MIDI signal in, but you don't want to use the clock, you know, you just want those like, you know, pitch and note information. So we'll use that and then not use any of the MIDI signal or the MIDI clock signal, and, you know, bada bing, bada boom, that's how you do that. And before we move on, we have to talk about the lonely little envelope output here. So the envelope output on the wavebar, of course, is going to be linked to the length control right here, giving us kind of more decay-centric envelopes on the right side and more sort of sharky attack decay on the left here. Now on the FX wizard, the envelope is going to actually be the input envelope follower. So just be aware that the envelope is going to have a different function depending on, which Bastl Citadel you have loaded. But that is another perfect segue into just briefly touching on the input and output ranges of our Patchbay here. So the note inputs for pitch are going to be about -0.2 to 7 volts. So that's going to give you, a pretty wide range of, a volt per octave to, pitch things around there. Now, the rest of the inputs, the LFO mod, bank in, sample input, length, LFO reset, and trig in, those are going to be bipolar inputs, -5 to +5. So, that's going to be, of course, our sample mod here, our LFO, those are going to be bipolar CV inputs there. And then the clock input, of course, reset, and the pattern inputs are going to be 0 to 5 volts. We kind of saw why with the pattern generator, because there's kind of the 3 ranges of voltage that correspond to the switches there. But yeah, so that's just real quick talking about the input ranges, and the output ranges for all of the white boxed little guys there is going to be 0 to 5 volts, with the exception of the left and right output that's going to be -5 to +5, and then the headphone output is going to be up to 2 volts PP. So line level compatible. Okay, I think the best thing to do at this point is to start patching these units together and, see what kind of things are different, what kind of things are similar. And for me, my favorite approach to this is to look at these 5 knobs here, because really that is all that is different between these 2 units on a physical face. And it's actually just these 5 input jacks as well, because they both feature a trig input right next to the MIDI input there. So let's patch the left-right output into the left-right input of the FX wizard here, and then let's just go out, left, and right, and we'll just go into our little bestie mixer over here. We'll turn that up, and then let's just hit play. Wow, that's nice and loud. Let's check our input gain here by holding shift. It's not clipping yet, but I have a feeling that it will get quite loud in the near future. And then let's maybe just back off the volume just a little bit there. All right, sounds good to me. So let's use the sample knob here on the wave bar to kind of, scrub through our little samples there, and then we can hop through banks with the bank button. I think I'm gonna use this sound a little bit. We can of course pitch it up with the pitch knob here, and then we can of course use this length knob to reverse things. We can use the pitch knob to pitch things up or way down. All right, so that's the top level functionality of the knobs and the buttons on the wave bar here. So let's hop over to the effects wizard and let's activate this amount, which kind of like turns the effect on. This is our dry wet here. So let's experience that, right? So of course this first one here is a delay. And we've got, our time function up here and our feedback function right down here. These are going to be our real-time, manipulators of our effects here. So let's just kind of get some sort of, just a nice basic pattern going on here. I'm just going to patch a CV signal into the sample modulation, and I'm going to do it on the play mode side, which just, brief little thing here about the play mode on the right side and the cue mode on the left side. The play mode will change it'll play a sample every time that the modulation moves over the threshold to move this knob. So we'll hear that almost immediately when we plug this in. We'll turn this down to kind of dial it in here. Maybe we'll just kind of... We'll get a random pattern. All right, that's sounding pretty good to me. It's workable, so let's kind of turn up this amount again. Let's actually get a little bit of clock sync going on here. We can see that we synced up clock. We can divide or multiply. Let's get it kind of just right nice like that. If you want a full reference on all of the effects in the Effects Wizard, check out the video manual on the Effects Wizard, or hop over and just check out the manual. There are 9 wonderful effects, and you're going to love every single one of them. Now, of course, some of these are going to work better on some things than on others. You know, there's a couple of like distortion-y ones, and there's a couple like really kooky time buffery ones. They're all very fun. But the Effects Wizard really rewards kind of hands-on playing and, you know, figuring out what works and what doesn't, and kind of, you know, moving with gestural things. And the brand new, really, you know, big form factor makes all of that really, really helpful in my opinion. Absolutely love it. Big fan. Of course, now we can grab Shift and use the filter, and it will apply a DJ style filtering effect. And we can use the filter in the same way on the wavebar, but it will affect the entire signal right away. And, you know, the input routing if you set that up. If we turn the Effects Wizard effect all the way off, we can try out the wavebar's internal effects by using the Shift and then moving the sample knob button. To the right, we get a really cool stereo chorusy flanger effect that gets just unruly towards the end. Really fun with the filter. And then on the left side, we have a delay. Also very fun with the filter. But let's come back over here and focus on the wavebar again just for a moment so we can see what's kind of going on here with the sample mod knob, because this is going to be really important to understand. So the sample mod knob, like I kind of commented earlier, on the right side, it is in play mode, which means that essentially as soon as the sample input here gets a voltage that moves this knob, it's going to trigger that sample to be played. So I think a really easy way to illustrate this is to grab just a static voltage from the Neo Trinity here. So as soon as we plug that in, see it moves the voltage and triggers the playback. But now see, this is just a knob essentially, and as soon as we move it past the threshold, so pretty much any sort of movement modulation going in there on the sample mod side here is gonna, trigger the playback of a sample. So if you were to, send it a nice steppy wave, that's exactly what you want, then you could really sequence this very precisely. You could also get really shifty things by kind of going, in with maybe like a triangle wave. And then you could limit the amount of modulation that happens, which is the amount of samples that you're going to get. So now maybe we just want those 3. And then maybe we want it to speed up. Maybe just make the length just a little bit, Sorry, I just get so carried away having so much fun. All right, so we got to talk about the other side of the knob, though, which is the Q mode. So if we were to do that same, we'll just put that loosey-goosey triangle right on into that sample slot there. On the left side of the knob, in Q mode, it's not playing right away because it's waiting for a trigger. So let's grab a gate from the pattern generator. And now every time that we get, a gate from this guy, let's see if we get one of those, more dense patterns, and we'll just speed this up. There we go. That's a good little dialed in right there. I like that. All right, cool. Okay, so this is actually a perfect moment for us to start applying some pitch mod information here. So I went into the note input, which is going to only update the pitch mod when it gets a trigger input here. It's also going to allow us to hold bank and then set the scale. So we can set the scale, the root note, and then more fine-tuning here if we so need. So it gives us a lot of control over how we tune our little scale here. And then why don't we grab the envelope here and go into the free input. Now that's going to give us a little bit of that, envelope action up there. And that's linked to the length here. But I just actually had another fun idea, which was maybe we'll actually use that envelope to go into the amount of the FX wizard over here, so we can see how the time actually works the same way. The time has a step and a free input, which allows us to either, update this time with, a trigger, or, update it freely. So let's dial that mod amount up there. And then we've got, a little trigger pattern going in here from our rhythm generator, and we'll get a random sequence, how about, so we can really kind of, yeah, there it is, there I can hear it real well now. We'll turn this up a little bit to get the maximum envelope effect, because we're going to take this envelope follower and maybe we'll control feedback with that. All right, and you can of course now use TRS MIDI to control both the Citadel Wavebard and the Citadel Effects Wizard. Let's head back into advanced mode here, and we can actually hold bank and then just, click something on our MIDI controller, and it will learn the channel there, and it'll actually flash the channel, the number that our channel is. So if we were to actually change to MIDI channel 3, let's say, and then repeat that process, we'll hold bank, and then, this time we'll turn a knob, and we'll let go. It'll blink 3 times for us here. But let's just go back to 1, and and there's actually one more way we could just manually change the MIDI channel. We can hold shift and click bank, and then it'll, the number of times we want. So if we want 2 times, 1, 2, but we want 1 time, 1, and then we will exit out of that. So let's get this Wavebard going back into this effects wizard here. We'll turn the amount down, and let's just see what happens when we start hitting some MIDI notes here. It's just playing whatever sample we seem to have selected chromatically, which is pretty awesome. I'm really a big fan of that. That is actually what is going to happen on the top half of the keyboard here. So if we start to go down, we will start to run into different behavior, which is so you can play the first 12 samples of whatever bank. If you've got more than 12 samples on your bank, sorry, that's only 12. You can play them just, one after another on the bottom octaves, and then on the top octave, the top 4 octaves, it's just whatever the last sample was. Chromatically, which is pretty fun. I'm a big fan. And then it is worth noting that the MIDI information will all be mixed with, the CV information here. And there's a little bit more detailed information on how the hierarchy goes there in the manual. We also cover that in the Wavebard standalone video. All right, so let's record a little sequence here. And we can see that we are actually, getting MIDI sync here, which is pretty sweet. We can absolutely multiply that signal or divide it. And that is going to affect, of course, the internal clock. And then I've actually assigned some CCs on these 4 knobs here, so let's check it out. I know that this one is the filter, and then this one is the sample selection. And then this one I think is the, it's the effects, because I wanted all the shift functions over here. And then I believe that this is just the pitch. So I can move it around in between the notes. And then I'm using the mod knob over here to step through the banks. Well, it's a touch, but I think one of my favorite features of using MIDI is that it opens up all of the other functions to totally be played by your CV signals. I'll take this moment to mention that you can actually use bank and amount to change the depth of the effects mode modulation. I love it for changing in between 2 effects that I really want, like these 2. All right, let's take a look at the WaveBard sample loader here, because this is how you're going to be able to get samples onto the WaveBard, as well as change your rhythms here and also add scales. So let's, start from the top here. So I'm using this, this is worth saying, as the standalone app right now, but you can access the sample loader through a Chrome browser. It's going to give you this little thing, and it is pretty much the same experience here. This is what it pulls up. If we come back over here and we look at what I've got going on here, we can see that I've already kind of uploaded quite a bit of stuff here. There's actually 12 banks, and I've got just a little bit of room left to do some more. So you can fit quite a bit on here, and that's pretty cool, I think. So just a real cursory look, we've got our preset up here. If we look at this, we can start an empty bank, or we could go back to the factory, and then the quality of the samples, we could go down. We could half the quality to 22 or quarter it. It says telephone there if you want that, but that would make an intensely large amount of room available to you on there. And then we also have processing samples. So I've got all of them selected here, just a little bit of fade in, a little bit of fade out, trim the quiet, so anything that's like, just too quiet, and then maximize all of them so it kind of just normalizes everything. Right underneath that is our scales editor here. So we have, this is pretty unique, and I like this, so we'll just kind of add a scale to see how this functionality works. So we've got a brand new scale here. It shows the knob position if we're pressing bank and then turning that knob there, and then we can go in and we can select here, and it'll make these little sounds. So there's like kind of like a little C minor triad, and then if we click it, and then we could kind of set up a few more. Okay, no, I don't like that right there. What I want is probably like this. Yeah. Okay, so that's like a little weird thing for me, so you can see how all of these work, and you can move them around if you want, you mess them up. You'll see that everything kind of adapts on the knob side, and if you want to delete them, you could do that too. And then if you want to revert back to default and confirm, same deal with the rhythm editor here. You've got a very, similar setup here. So let's actually spice these up a little bit. I'm gonna make a kind of like a more, weird, kind of, like a little something interesting. And then what we'll also do is we will add maybe like 1, 2, 3, and these last 3, let's have just be, so like I absolutely know when I go in to start programming that like the last part of the knob, of the rhythm thing is gonna be like this roll like this, and then it's gonna be like ba 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 ba, and then this is gonna be just straight nothing but rhythms, and then I will confirm that rhythm, and there we go. Okay, so if we look at the samples that we've loaded here, you can see that we've got kind of the same setup here. We can click on these samples to sample them, and we can shift them around in here. It'll change, the knob thing. We can move them around like this, and we can change the colors here. This little button is gonna make it stereo or not. You see it's got a little, see this one I can turn stereo, and it'll change that accordingly, the size thing. But the only limitation here is that you stay within the memory limit, and that all of these sample banks need to have the same number of samples. So all my sample banks have 7 samples, you see. And if I was to, let's say, you see right now we can generate a firmware, and click that button and generate a firmware. If we were to add a bank that has 0 samples, generate firmware is grayed out, because see, some samples or some banks don't contain samples. You need at least 3 samples in a bank. It tells you a lot of this information right down here at the bottom if you ever forget, and always remember to have fun. So yeah, so that's that is the little sample section here, and we actually, we've got a little bit more room. Boop, 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 boop. And you can see that I've kind of actually laid these out in sort of interesting ways. Like these first 3 are kind of just a little bit wacky. These middle 3 here, which actually I'm gonna make all the middle 3 ones like kind of dark reds. Like a red, an orange. Okay, now that everything looks nice and colorful, I'll kind of explain this properly. So this middle section I've set up so that all of the banks have the, kick, hat, snare, closed hi-hat. It's all kind of set up in this same sort of, structure here. So my intention is to kind of be able to, scrub between these 3 banks and kind of get like a really cool shifting drum pattern there. And then, I've got these banks down here just kind of like a little bit more weird with percussion that are kind of more loosey-goosey. And then I've got just a bunch of weird sounds from the grandpa. They will just play, by the way, it's a long sample. So let's add one more bank because I did have a break bank, the breaker bank, and I need something to kind of go with that. So let's take a look here and get something in here. Like, all right, so I like that pad. Maybe we'll take it. Let's get a big fat stinky 808 in here. Yeah, that's better. Oh no, we gotta scroll down. Drop it right here. 7 samples is what we need. SFX. Let's have a go. Right? Okay, cool. This is our 100 gex bank. So let's rename it that. Gek. Okie dokie. And now that we've got all of these banks, they're ready to rock. They're what have we got here? 13 banks. Heck yeah. And let's generate a firmware here, right? Bada bang, bada boom. And this is going to tell us here something that's pretty important, is that when we load the firmware up, it's going to take a little bit of time to write all that. So, just be patient. And now that we've got our firmware file ready, we're just going to hold shift and plug this cable in. And this is going to show up on our desktop as a little drive here. So we're just going to grab our firmware file and we're going to pop it on there. Now, this might just take a second. It kind of just takes a little bit of time here. And while we're waiting, we'll just say, hey, you should go check out the WaveBard and the FX Wizard videos and, check out the MIDI update videos. Just check out all the videos on our channel and, have a fun time. This would be a perfect time to pull up a video and just, have a blast. It usually takes like, I'd say, 3-ish minutes to do this. So, be patient. It's no biggie. Sometimes it takes less. I don't know. I'll probably flash on screen exactly how long this took. Oh, it's done. Hooray. All right, and that's about all of the information that I can cram into this video without feeling like an overload. I really recommend that you go check out both the original WaveBard and the original FX Wizard videos, and also the MIDI update. Naturally, we're going to need you to like, subscribe, head on over to the website, check out what's going on, stay up to date, okay? I've been your pal Wes. This has been the Bastl Citadel, and you've been great. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.